Today I picked one bag of M&Ms up off a shelf near a checkout counter and read every word on it, front and back, before I let myself put it down. 4 dyes on that back panel are the same 4 that federal health officials have been asking candy makers to walk away from by the end of 2026. And this bag, right now, today, still has every one of them. By the end of this, I will tell you exactly what I think you should do with the bag in your own cabinet. And I will tell you the one line on this label that surprised me more than anything else I read this month. Do you buy these because you actually chose them, or because they were sitting there at the register and you were already tired of waiting in line? I ask because I want to know how many of you have a bag of these in a coat pocket or a glove box right now without ever once turning it over. I remember the exact shelf where I first stopped trusting a bright bag just because it was bright. It was not this one. It was a cereal box, years after I had already left the life I was raised in, standing in a fluorescent aisle with a child pulling at my sleeve, reading a colour list on the side panel that had nothing to do with the fruit pictured on the front. I put that box back. I did not put this bag back the first time I picked it up, or the second, or the 10th. It took me longer than I would like to admit to apply the same standard to candy that I had already applied to cereal. M&M's carries a kind of trust most candy never earns. It is not a boutique bar with a story printed on raffia paper. It is the plain, familiar bag that has been sitting at the checkout counter of nearly every grocery store and gas station in this country for longer than most of us have been alive. That familiarity does something to a person. It quiets the part of the brain that usually asks questions. Nobody stands at the register with a bag of M&Ms and wonders what is inside it, because everybody already assumes they know. I learnt to judge food before I learnt to judge anything else. That part of me never left, and it is exactly what makes a bag like this worth a second look, not less of one. This year, that easy trust is sitting next to a harder conversation. Federal health officials have publicly pushed candy and cereal makers to remove synthetic petroleum-based dyes from their products, with a target of phasing them out by the end of 2026. And Mars, the company behind this bag, has said publicly that it intends to move in that direction. So the bag in my hand right now is, in a real sense, a bag on its way out. What is printed on it today may not be printed on it a year from now. That does not erase what is on it today. There is a term worth knowing before we go any further, because it explains why a bag like this can carry the exact same dyes it carried a decade ago, without anyone along the way stopping to ask why. It is called, generally recognized as, safe, a regulatory category that lets an ingredient stay in the food supply for years, sometimes decades, on the strength of an approval that was granted once, a long time ago, and never required to be revisited unless someone forces the question. Synthetic dye has lived inside that category for most of my lifetime. It is not a secret status. It is simply a status most shoppers have never heard named out loud, which is exactly why a bag can sit at a checkout counter for generations without anyone asking what is actually colouring the candy inside it. I did not learn that term from anything I was raised with. I learned it the way most of us learn anything now, late, and only because I finally went looking. My mother's pantry did not have this conversation in it at all. It had flour and lard and jars she filled herself, and if something in that pantry was a strange colour, it was because of what grew that particular year, not because of anything poured in from a bottle with a number on it. I am not saying that made her cooking safer in every sense. I am saying it made her cooking legible in a way this bag is not. And legibility is the entire thing I am chasing every time I turn a package over. I held the bag before I opened it. It has the weight of something meant to be shared, not savoured. A family size, built for a bowl at a party or a stretch of a long drive. Not a single quiet moment with one piece at a time. The front of the bag is bright, almost aggressively cheerful, with characters that have been part of American candy aisles for generations. Turn it over, though, and the tone changes completely. The back panel is small type, dense type, the kind that assumes you are not going to read it. I read it anyway. This is what the ingredient list shows. Milk chocolate comes first. Sugar, chocolate, skim milk, cocoa butter and milkfat in that order, which tells you sugar is doing more of the work in this bag than cocoa is. That is not an accusation. That is simply how ingredient ordering works. Whatever appears first is present in the largest amount. Read that again. Sugar ahead of chocolate, in a candy that sells itself on the promise of chocolate. I trusted this brand myself for years because of the name on the front, before I ever turned it over. My mother kept a bowl of these on the counter at holidays, the way a lot of mothers did, and nobody in that house ever asked what was actually inside them. It never occurred to us to ask. That is the whole point of a familiar bag. It buys itself out of scrutiny just by being familiar. I do not think that was ever a secret Mars was keeping. I think it is simply what happens when a product becomes part of the wallpaper of American life. Nobody interrogates the wallpaper. Further down the list comes the part everyone is actually here for, the colouring. Red number 40, yellow number 5, yellow number 6, blue number 1, blue number 2, depending on which bag you are holding. These are the synthetic, petroleum-derived dyes that regulators have specifically named in their push to move American candy away from artificial colour. This is not a hidden ingredient. It is printed plainly, right where it has always been printed. The plain language conclusion is simple. The bright, uniform colour of every piece in this bag does not come from cocoa or fruit or any plant at all. It comes from a laboratory. That is not an accusation of wrongdoing. Synthetic dyes have been legal, approved, and standard in American candy for decades. But legal and quiet are not the same thing. And once you know to look for those 4 names, you cannot unsee them. Do you check the colour list? Or do you just trust that a bright red candy came from something red? Most of us never ask, because there is nothing on the front of the bag suggesting we should. There is also artificial flavour listed, in small type, tucked between the fat and the emulsifier, with no further description of what that flavour is meant to be beyond the word chocolate itself. That is not unusual for candy of this kind, and it is not hidden. It is exactly where regulations require it to sit. But it is worth noticing that a product built entirely around the identity of chocolate needs an additional, unnamed flavour added back in at all. That fact alone does not condemn the bag. It simply tells you that the chocolate flavour you taste is not resting on cocoa content alone to do its job. Here is where I want to be careful, because this is not the same as saying a company lied to anyone. Every one of those dyes is listed. Nothing here was hidden in fine print smaller than the rest. Nothing was buried under a name designed to confuse a shopper. The information has been sitting on the back of this bag the entire time, for anyone willing to read it. What changed is not the label. What changed is how many people are finally reading it. There is a second name further down that deserves its own moment. Soy lecithin, listed as an emulsifier, the ingredient responsible for keeping the fat and the sugar from separating inside that chocolate shell. It is a small, unglamorous ingredient derived from soybeans, doing a job most people never think about. I do not have a complaint about lecithin. I include it because it is one of the few things in this bag that is doing exactly what it says it is doing. Nothing more, nothing less. That is not always true of everything else on this panel. Now, I want to be fair about something, because a one-sided verdict is not a verdict at all. It is a complaint dressed up as one. Mars has been public and specific about its plan to remove synthetic dyes from its United States candy lineup, and that is not a small commitment for a company whose products are built on bright, uniform, recognizable color. Reformulating a product this size, sold at this scale, without changing the taste people expect, is not simple work. That is worth saying plainly. This is not a company sitting still while the world moves around it. I bought this exact brand for years before I understood what any of those 4 letters and 2 numbers actually meant. I was not being careless. I was being exactly as trusting as the bag was designed for me to be. That is the anti-pattern I want to name clearly, because I do not think I am the only one who has done it. Reaching for the bag with the character on the front instead of the panel on the back. Every single time, for years, without once feeling like I was skipping a step. Here is the plain language conclusion I keep coming back to. The label you are looking at today, on the bag sitting in your own cabinet, is very likely a label already scheduled to change. That does not mean today's bag is dangerous. It means today's bag is a snapshot of a formula in the middle of being rewritten, and the version your children eat next year may not carry the same 4 names this one does. I have not bought a jar of anything from this shelf without turning it over first, since I left the way I was raised to only trust what was in front of me. I do not plan to start again now. If you have been watching candy aisles the way I have this year, you already know M&M's is not alone on this shelf. Several major candy and cereal brands have been named in the same conversation, asked the same question, given the same deadline. What sets this bag apart is not that it is worse than the others. It is that it sits at nearly every checkout counter in the country, which means more households are holding this exact question in their hands than almost any other product on the shelf. Something happens the moment you are not the only person who bought a channel subscription because you wanted someone to read the fine print out loud for you instead of trusting the front of the box. That is who this channel is for. Not people looking for outrage, people looking for someone willing to turn the bag over and actually read what is there. Availability and formulas are not fixed things. What is sitting in a bag in one state can differ slightly from what sits in a bag in another. And a company actively moving away from synthetic dye, the way Mars has said it is doing, means the exact ingredient list in your hand today may already be different from the one I am holding. That is not a flaw in what I am telling you. It is simply the nature of reading a label in the middle of a change instead of after one. Go check your own bag. Do not take my word over your own eyes. I say this every time I sit down to record one of these, and I will keep saying it, because it matters more than any single verdict I give. A label is not a fixed document. It is a photograph of a formula on the day it was printed. Somebody in a factory changes a supplier, a regulator changes a rule, a company changes its mind under public pressure, and the next bag off the same shelf can be quietly different from the one you are holding now. That is not deception. That is simply how a food supply this large moves. Do you think a company should be allowed to sell the old formula right up until the deadline? Or should the change happen the moment the plan is announced? I genuinely do not know the right answer to that, and I would like to hear what you think. because it is not as simple as it sounds from the outside. Here is the larger principle underneath all of this, and it has nothing to do with M&Ms specifically. Bright packaging and a familiar name on the front of a bag were never designed to tell you what is inside. They were designed to make you feel like you already know, so that you never feel the need to check. A label does not become trustworthy because it is colourful, or because it has been on a shelf since before you were born. It becomes trustworthy the moment somebody actually reads it out loud. So, here is where I land. This is not a bag I would call dangerous, and it is not a company I believe set out to hide anything from anyone. What it is a bag mid-change, built on synthetic colour the country has decided it wants less of, sitting on sugar listed ahead of chocolate, at a moment where the company behind it has already said publicly that this exact label is not meant to last. If you are choosing today, and you want the same shape of candy without the same 4 names on the colour line, look for the versions already reformulated with fruit and vegetable-based colour, which several companies, including some competitors in this exact aisle, have already begun rolling out. That is not a guess. That is simply where the industry is heading, out loud, in public, right now. Turn over the one bag from your own pantry that is closest to this one, and tell me, in the comments, what colour list you find on the back. 4 names? 5? None at all because yours has already changed. I want to know which version is sitting in your kitchen tonight. I told you 2 things at the start of this. I told you every dye on this label is one regulators have specifically asked companies to remove, and I told you I would give you the one line that surprised me most. Here it is. The line that surprised me was not the dye list at all. It was seeing sugar listed before chocolate, in the one candy in America built entirely on the promise of chocolate. Read that again next time you're standing at the register. That is the whole label. And now you have read it too.